And what's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of our Kosher Curiosities series. This is part 12 of our series that we began a few months ago that has gained a lot of popularity. B'li'ayin hara, a lot of people joining us online, a lot of people listening to it on YouTube. That's wonderful. It's great because we get to learn halacha and we get to investigate certain parts of kashrut that a lot of people are curious about. That's why it's called Kosher Curiosities. We just finished a three-part series on bugs, and now we're going to begin a lengthy series on basar bechalav, otherwise known as meat and milk. This arguably is the most commonly discussed and asked about part of kashrut. It is, we have our kitchens, we have separate sinks, some of us have separate ovens, separate dishwashers. We're going to tackle all of that. It's going to take a while to get through, and I hope that you remain with me from now till the end, because each section, each part of what we're going to study is important and practical. And although you might not be looking for this specific answer that we're going to address today, but I guarantee you that everything that we're going to learn about basar bechalav is very much relevant, and I'm sure you have come across maybe a question or an inquiry of the sort that we are going to speak about today. So, and in the future classes, Bezrat Hashem. So, as we normally do, we start at the beginning of the parak, at the beginning of the section, by Pnei Halacha, Rabbi Eliezer Melamed. That's who we are learning by, and we will see where we get to in this half an hour. So let's begin. He begins his chapter 25 in his kashrut section, Basar Bechalav. He says, Asra ha-Torah lebashel basar im halav. The Torah forbade us to cook meat with milk. Shne'emar, as the pasuk says, Lo tebashel gedi b'halev imo. Person cannot cook a kid in his mother's milk. That was actually found. It's found three times in the parashas and the Torahs. We're going to see the first part. The first time this is mentioned is actually in Parashat Mishpatim, which we read a couple of weeks ago. Shalosh pe'amim nizkar isur ze b'Torah. As I mentioned, there are three times in the Torah that this isur, this prohibition, is mentioned. Lelamdenu, to teach us. Sheshlosha chalakim leisur. There are three parts to the prohibition. Aleph, isur lebashelam yachad. There is a prohibition to cook the meat and the milk together. Bet, im bishlum yachad asur leochlam. If you cook them together, you wouldn't be allowed to eat them together. And Gimel, the third, im bishlum yachad, if you cook them together, asur gam lehanot mehem. You also cannot have any benefit from the meat and the milk. Isur ze meyuchad veshone mishe'ar isure achila. This prohibition is different than the rest of the prohibitions that have to do with eating. Shekol ha'machalim asurim, asurim tamid. The other prohibitions with regards to eating, such as a pig, for example, is constantly and always asur to eat. Ve'ilu basar kishle'atzmo kasher, but the meat alone is kosher. Ve'chalav kishle'atzmo kasher, and the milk alone is kosher. Ubishulam yachad asur, but when you cook them together, that's what makes it asur. Ve'imit bashlu yachad, and if they were cooked together, nesru be'isur hamur b'miuchad, we have this extra strict, extra severe prohibition. Shekol shara machalim ha'asurim, all the other types of forbidden foods, kedugmat basar behemot vechayot temeot. For example, if you have the meat of a behema, such as a cow, and or a chayot temeot, sorry, not a cow, basar behemot vechayot temeot. If you have meat of an animal that is not kosher, such as a zebra or meat of a lion, Mutar leIsrael levasher avur nochri. I'm allowed to take the meat of this animal and cook it for a non-Jew. No problem to take zebra meat and me cooking it for a non-Jew. Aval basar bechalav asur leIsrael lebasher avur nochri. But meat and milk, I am not allowed to cook for a non-Jew. Ve'af lesaya bebishulam asur. Even to assist them in the cooking process, that's also not allowed. Kegon lehagbir et ha'esh she'al yada hem mitbashlim. For example, even if a Jew was to raise and increase the fire and the flame in the oven or on the stove and assist the non-Jew of cooking the meat and milk, that is not allowed. Benosaf lekach, in addition, basar vechalav sheitbashlu. If you have meat and milk that were cooked, asurim bahana'a, they are not allowed to have any benefit from it. V'lachen asur lemochram legoy. You can't even sell this food to a non-Jew. ואפילו לתת לו במתנה אסור. Even to give it as a gift is not allowed. Why? הואיל ויש לישראל הנאה מכך, because there is hana'ah, there is benefit on the part of the Jew. He's giving a gift or he's selling it to a non-Jew. V'gaf im yisrof otam, even if you were to burn the meat and the milk, asur le'anot mechom srefatam, you can't even enjoy the heat from what's being burned. Or me'ha'afar sheyatza mehem, or me'ha'efer sheyatza mehem, or from the ashes that came out. ואפילו לתת אותם לפני בעלי חיים של הפקר אסור. Even to take meat and milk and to throw it in front of stray animals that aren't ownerless, also asur. Because he is getting benefit from it. Ela yesh likbor et ha'isur. The only solution would be to bury this meat and milk. And if it's difficult to do so, you're able to throw it in the field, or in the garbage. Even though, yes, if you throw it in the field in the open ground, there's probably going to be birds and animals that come and eat it. And there is no prohibition, because you're not intending for any of these animals to come and eat it. Torah, from the Torah, ha'isur hu lebashel basar v'chalav. The isur is to cook meat and milk. Ublo bishul, and without cooking, en isur. There is no prohibition. Lefichach, that is why. Therefore, mutar le'arba miyachad belo bishul letzorech nochri o lechol tzorech acher. I can take and combine meat and milk and put it in a doggy bag, in a paper bag, for the purpose of a non-Jew or for any other need. V'chachamim asu seyag la Torah, but the rabbis made a seyag, made a fence. Ve'asru leIsrael le'echol basar bechalav yachad gam belo bishul. And they forbade a Jew to eat meat and milk, even if that meat and milk was not cooked. V'chizku chachamim seyag ze beisurim rabim. And the rabbis even enforced this fence with other prohibitions, as we're going to see later on. You cannot eat one type. For example, you cannot eat meat if there is dairy on the same table. We're going to get to that in the third halacha. You cannot bake a meat bread or a dairy bread, lest you eat it with the other type of food. We're going to get that in the fourth halacha. The rabbis also said you cannot eat meat after, so you cannot eat dairy after meat without waiting a certain amount of time. And you cannot eat meat after milk without cleaning your mouth. We're going to see that actually in the next chapter. So we have to wait a few halachot before we actually get to that. We're going to explain all of these reasons later on as we go by. Next halacha. The Tanaim, which were the rabbis in the Mishnah, they were at disagreement with regarding the following question. Which types of meat and milk are included in the Torah prohibition? Ledat Rabbi Akiva, according to Rabbi Akiva, habasar ve'achalav shene'esru hem shel echad mishloshet minei habehema teora. When the Torah forbade meat and milk, it have to come from the three animals, the three kosher animals, which are shor, keves, and ez, which are a bull or cow, keves or lambs, the ez is a goat. Ulam, however, sheva minei achayot teorot, but any type of undomesticated animal that are kosher, kedugma tzevi va'ayal, like a ram or a deer, enam bichlal isur haTorah. They are not included in the Torah prohibition of meat and milk. Ve'af din ze lamanu mikach. We learned this law from the fact שהתורה חזרה שלוש פעמים על איסור לא תבשל גדי בחלב אימו. The Torah says you cannot cook a kid in its mother's milk. למדנו ששלושת מיני הבהמות הטהורות בכלל האיסור. That's only the three types of kosher animals are included in this prohibition. ואילו מיני חיה טהורה, the undomesticated animal, ועוף טהור, and also a kosher bird. ובהמות חיות טמאים, and non-kosher animals, אינם בכלל האיסור, are not included in the isur, in the prohibition from the Torah. ההבדל בין בהמות לחיות, the difference between a behema and a chaya, שהבהמות מבויתות והחייתות אינן מבויתות. an animal is, when we say behema, it's really domesticated animals such as cows and sheep, and a chaya is not considered domesticated. Since a cow is usually found in the property of man, it is very much possible for a man to milk his cow and at the same time shecht one of the offspring. The Torah forbade us to mix the meat from one animal and the milk from another animal. And the reason why the Torah gave the example of a kid with his mother's milk is as follows: the milk of the goat is abundant. There's a lot of milk. Sometimes a goat will give birth to two kids. And after the gedi, these kids, these baby goats, grew up or became larger, they would shecht one of them in order to eat from the meat. Or even though the mother is still nursing the second kid, sometimes that's what would happen. They would actually eat the meat of one of the children with the milk of the mother. This is all according to Rabbi Yosef, according to Rabbi Akiva. Udat Rabbi Yosef Aglili, the other Tana, Zemos Rabbi Yosef, Gam Shiv'at Minei Hachayot Teorot Bichlal Isur Torah. Even the other undomesticated animals are also included in the prohibition of the Torah prohibition of meat and milk. The reason is because they also, their meat is kosher, their milk is kosher, and therefore they're included. Aval of eno bichal ha'isur, but a bird is not included in the isur. Hoil unekevata of en chalav, because there is no milk found in the female bird. V'yesh omrim, there are those who say shegam basar of bichlal isur Torah. Some say that even the meat of a bird is included in the Torah prohibition. Hoy vegam hu min basar, because it is a type of meat. And the proof is the only way you can eat chicken is that you have to actually shecht it. Lemaase nifsak kedat Rabbi Akiva. The halacha is like Rabbi Akiva. Sheisur Torah chal rak al minei behemot. According to Rabbi Akiva, and that's the halacha, that the Torah prohibition only falls under domesticated animals. But from the rabbis, asur leechol gam minei chaya va'of. A person is not allowed to eat other types of non-domesticated animals and as well chicken, im chalav, with milk. Aval mutar lebashelam legoy umutar leanot mehem. However, a person is allowed to cook chicken and milk, or an undomesticated animal meat with milk, for a non-Jew. And as well, a person is allowed to have benefit from this type of mixture. So a person can sell chicken and milk combination and make money out of it, or sell it to a goy. That would be allowed. So that is the source with regards to what is considered a Torah prohibition and what is considered a rabbinical prohibition, and where chicken and birds fit in all this. The third halacha has to do with eating on the same table, which we already mentioned, but we're going to explain about it a little bit more now. Tiknu Chachamim, the rabbis established, shebe'et she'adam ochel ma'achal besari, that when a person is eating meat food, lo yeh munach al shulchano ma'achal halavi. A person should not have any dairy foods on that table. Ube'et shehu ochel ma'achal halavi, and when he's eating dairy foods, lo yeh munach al shulchano ma'achal besari. He should not have any meat foods. Kedesh lo yit'ayeh le'ochlam yachad, in order that a person should not make a mistake and err to eat them together. Now, this is not only with regards to meat of a domesticated animal. This also applies to chicken. A person is eating chicken cannot have dairy on the table. Aval mutar lemi shachal basar lehachin ma'achale chalav lifnei shavru alav shesh shaot. However, if a person is preparing, a person ate meat, but he wants to prepare dairy, that is allowed, even though 6 hours haven't passed. Of course, 6 hours, as we're going to see later on in the next chapter, is, according to most opinions, the amount of time that you need to wait before eating. מפני שהתקנה נועדה לשמש סייג בפני אכילת שני המינים יחד. The whole takana was regard to eating, ולא לשמירת המתנה בין אכילת בשר לאכילת חלב. And it's not just it's not a protection. I can't prepare food. That was not the reason why it was instituted. תקנו חכמים שגם שני אנשים שמאכילים זה את זה לא יאכלו על שולחן אחד, זה בשר וזה חלב. Now, not only am I not allowed to have dairy on the table if I'm eating meat, but let's say I'm eating meat and my friend's eating dairy, we cannot sit on the same table if we know each other. And the reason is, Shema yavo echad lechol mimachal havero, because we're worried that the one friend is going to eat the food of another friend. V'nimsa ochel basar im chalav, and then you're going to be eating meat and milk. אבל לא אסור על שני אנשים זרים שהזדמנו למקום אחד לאכול על שולחן אחד. This does not apply to two strangers who happen to sit down at the same table. זה בשר וזה חלב, this one meat and this one milk. מפני שאדם זר אינו רגיל ליטול מאכל משל שכנו, because a stranger is not accustomed to just grab the food from somebody else's plate. אם שני האנשים שמאכילים זה את זה יניחו ביניהם סימן שיזכיר להם להיבדל זה ממאכלו של זה. Now, let's say these two friends sit down at the table. One of them is eating a hamburger, and one of them is eating pizza. If we said that that's not allowed, but let's say they place something in between them that acts as a heket, an object where they would see this object, this strange object that's usually not on the table, and they will remember not to partake from each other's food. Therefore, rashaim le'echol yachad al shulchan echad. In that situation, you would be allowed to eat from each other's table. Nitan le'aniach lasiman kli o ma'achal she'en regilim le'aniach sham. Again, the best thing would be to put a certain utensil or vessel that is not normally placed on a table, or a food that is not normally put there. V'chen lifrosh mapa nifredet le'achad mehem. Or also, you can spread a separate tablecloth or a mat, a placemat that is different than the next. If they are sitting far from each other, where it is impossible for one person to reach over and take the food of the next because they are sitting so far apart, in that situation, you wouldn't even need a particular object there as a reminder because you are far apart enough. If someone finished eating meat, a person is now able to go and sit next to his friend who is eating dairy, and while you who ate meat, you can now start eating parv foods, even if 6 hours have not passed. Halacha Dalet has to do with dairy bread and meat bread, a very important halacha. Gazru chachamim shelo lalush batzek shel lechem bechalav. A person should not knead a dough that is dairy bread. Shema yishkechu she'alechem chalavi v'yavo leochelo im basar. Because we're worried that the person will forget that this bread is dairy and he's going to go eat it with meat. And the same thing, the rabbis also made a decree not to knead the bread with some sort of meat grease. I guess this was good for the bread. Because you might forget that this meat is now meat. And you will come to eat this meat with this bread with dairy. Let's say a person made a mistake and he added butter or milk to his dough, and now he has a dairy bread. The rabbis established that this bread cannot be eaten. The isur, the prohibition, it came about when a person prepares enough bread, or he's making enough bread that will extend past one meal. אבל מותר להכין לחם חלבי או בשרי כשיעור שבני הבית יסיימו בסעודה סמוכה. A person is allowed to make dairy bread, a person is allowed to make meat bread when it's just enough for that meal. כי אין חשש שעד הסעודה סמוכה ישכחו שהוא חלבי או בשרי. Because they know that bread is being made for that particular meal, and I know this particular meal that I made this dairy bread, I'm having dairy food, and I'm just having I'm eating this bread with this meal, and therefore it's fine. The issue is if I make a lot of bread that is dairy, and then I toss it in the freezer, I keep it on my counter, and someone will come and grab that bread and eat it with meat, and that's where the problem is. He's also allowed to prepare meat or dairy bread. If you shape the bread in a abnormal way. באופן שבני הבית יבינו שדינו שונה ויבררו אם הוא חלבי או בשרי, where all the members of the household will see this bread and they're going to go, oh, that's weird. Why is this bread shaped this way? Ah, I know why. Because it's a dairy bread. Oh, I know. My mom shaped the meat in the shaped the bread in the shape of an M. That means it's meat. Or we could say milk, whatever. So maybe the M is not a good example. But there's a siman in the shape of the bread that a person will realize and understand this is either a dairy bread or a meat bread. However, you need to know that a person cannot do this siman for the purpose of baking and selling it to other people. Shema yu anashim shelo yasimu lev siman, because it could be a lot of people don't understand what your siman is. It's only when it is a siman muvhak, it is a standard siman. Let's say you put a knot at the end of some sort, or you cut in an X. Okay, that would be your dairy bread, where everybody knows mutar. Kemo pita, for example, a pita shedvuka alea gvina tzehuva or tetzuvat basar, right? Where you might have you might put some cheese against the pita, yellow cheese, or a strip of meat. You have to have some sort of siman over there to know. Ha'isur udavka balechem. The prohibition is specifically with regards to bread. Sheregilim leochlo im achalim chalavim o besarim, where a person normally eats bread with meat or milk. V'chen karkarim shelaitim ochlim im gvina ulitim im naknik, or you have some buns where a person would eat dairy with or a hot dog. Aval ugot, but if you have cake, ushar ma'afim, or other types of pastries, mutar le'achin chalavim o besarim, you would be allowed to have a dairy, a cheese bureka, or a meat bureka. That is fine. Hoil b'derech klal en ochlim otam im basar o chalav, because they're usually a standalone product and they're not eaten. Or a dairy croissant would be fine, because you're not usually eating that with meat. It's not, bread is a staple food that gets eaten with other foods. That's why we're worried about not other pastries. Let's do one more halacha and then we'll conclude for today. Ra'ui lishol, we should ask, the rabbis generally don't decree something when there's already a decree, like a decree on a decree. We have the prohibition of eating meat when there is milk on the table, dairy on the table. And then this isur that we just mentioned about baking dairy bread or meat bread, this seems to be gazru gezerah ligzerah. This seems to be again a decree on a decree. Why? The Torah only forbade cooking meat and milk together. The rabbis, Gzerah number one, decree number one, the rabbis said that the rabbis can't eat meat and milk even if they were not cooked together. So now, why did the rabbis add another gzerah? Why did the rabbis add another decree that you cannot eat meat if there's dairy on the table, or you cannot eat a meat bread, or a dairy? You cannot make a dairy bread. Why did they add this extra restriction when normally that is not things that the Chachamim do? The rabbis explain, in connection to the prohibition of basar v'chalav, we have a huge stumbling block here. Because, like we said, the meat on its own is allowed. And the milk on its own is allowed. And both of them, meat and milk, are commonly found in kitchens. And very easily they can be mixed. And that's why the rabbis needed to add more gzerot. If the rabbis did not add these gzerot, then even the original decrees would not have been kept. All these decrees are considered like one gzerah, which is meant to maintain the separation between meat and milk. Lo zu bilvad, not only this, ela shebechol gzerot ha'achila, all the decrees with regards to food, hishvu basar of vechaya, the rabbis equated the meat of chicken and undomesticated animals, they equated them to the Torah prohibition of domesticated meat. Because if a person was to be lenient with regards to chicken, God forbid, gam bibasar behema. A person might, God forbid, come and be lenient with regards to actual meat, domesticated animal meat, which we said is a Torah prohibition. We're going to pause here for today. We're going to conclude our first section of Basar B'Chalav. Of course, there's a lot more to talk about and a lot more to discuss over the next few weeks as we go about this very, very much discussed topic. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening, and I hope you join us next time, B'ezrat Hashem, as we continue this topic of meat and milk, Basar B'Chalav, in our Kosher Curiosity series. Everyone should have a wonderful night.